Aquaba, greetings. A wonderful Sunday afternoon or evening, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices. We are so happy that you are here to join us today for this, what I would humbly call one of our most important broadcasts, this 114th episode, when we unpack and break down Kwame Nkrumah's classic manifesto, The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. This is a book that we as revolutionary Pan-Africanists, we believe in, like Christians believe in the Bible, like Muslims believe in the Quran, like Jews believe in the Torah. We believe in this handbook of revolutionary warfare. And that's not to say that we are elevating Kwame Nkrumah to some sort of immortal status. We understand clearly that he was a man. He's not physically here anymore. So there's no evidence to suggest that he was anything other than a man. But we are driven by ideas. And the ideas expressed in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare to us represent the most correct vision for how we do the work to get our people free. So the session today, we're going to break down that handbook, because a lot of people read the handbook like individually on their own, and that's great. That's great that they're seeking out that information. But if you are not in an organization fighting to organize people for revolution, your heart can be in the most perfect place it could possibly be, but you are not going to understand the concepts that he's talking about in the handbook. You cannot understand them from an individual perspective. So we are going to do our best to try to build that bridge stronger, to make that connection. And that's what today's broadcast is all about, you all. So again, we thank you for joining us. And we always start by giving respect and honor to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. We honor them and their just and righteous fight to regain these lands that belong justifiably to them. And they have a right to regain these lands by any means necessary. And they have been extremely patient for 500 plus years. And so I say that to say that whatever method they come to the point of employing to get these lands back, they are justified in doing so. And we stand 100% with them in whatever that methodology would be. The tactics of our enemies of dividing us, dividing our colonized communities, are fast coming to a close. So we stand in complete solidarity with the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. And the reason why we can do that is because, unlike some confused Africans that exist here in the Western Hemisphere, we know who we are. We are African people, and the only justifiable land we have any rights to is Africa. No matter where we live, that's irrelevant to the point of what we have a justifiable right to. And so because we know we are Africans, that means we study Africa, and we are proud of Africa. We are proud to be African. So their 500-year colonial effort to turn us against who we are as a people, and to continue to make us ignorant about who we are as Africans, and to defame and discredit our ancestors, will never be effective. In fact, we are turning the tide on that backward confusion. So we know we're Africans, and we are proud of Africa. So we stand for the liberation of Africa. And Kwame Nkrumah's handbook, of course, was written specifically for that task. So we honor our African ancestors who have paved that bridge for Nkrumah's work and those of his generation, all those before him, all those after him, including us, and all those that will come after us. And so we're thankful that you're here to join us. We hope that you're at your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health. And we think you will certainly enjoy this broadcast, and it will bring some light to what our work is in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So we start with just introducing the general concepts. Our Ancestors' Voices, this weekly program, is of course sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the AAPRP. And the AAPRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass political Pan-African party based in Africa. And our objective What we are fighting for is Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, which we define correctly as one unified socialist Africa, one unified socialist Africa. That is our work. And we see Pan-Africanism as the solution to the problem 2 billion Africans face, scattered and suffering in 120 countries worldwide. And our work to achieve Pan-Africanism is laid out for us through primarily Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which you see displayed on the next page. And so that is the strategy that we will be talking about today. And our Ancestors' Voices, this program, this weekly program, of which this is the 114th episode, is hosted each week by myself, Ajamu, and Shakura, my daughter, who both of us are active and proud organizers in the All African People's Revolutionary Party. So this important topic, Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, breaking it down. We'll get it started, and I'll hand it over to Shakura to do that.
Greetings, 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 everyone. Hopefully you are in good spirits and doing well. We are so excited to start off today's presentation by talking about our comrade Nkrumah, because I personally had much better of an understanding and work study once I picked up his autobiography. Even though we are not talking about his autobiography today, I bring that up, and I was talking about this with another work study member just 2 weeks ago when we met, or last week, I think, because we were talking about how we appreciate that Nkrumah has such a delicate and soft way of writing. So whether it's the handbook, whether it's the autobiography, if it's another book, Africa in Unity, that you've picked up, especially if you're in work study, but even if you're not, if you're in another organization that is still talking about Kwame Nkrumah, you must understand and you must appreciate how this comrade was able to write and put sentences together, because he was talking about very unique and complex topics, but able to break them down on a level that, in theory, an 8-year-old would be able to understand just as much as a 62-year-old would be able to understand. And I just really have an appreciation for that, because if you have not engaged with that kind of reading before, if you didn't know that cacao was one of the major products that was produced out of Africa, he was able to explain that to you in a way to help you understand. He was able to help you understand why running for presidency and why Ghana needed to be independent was so important for the masses of people in Ghana, yes, but also for the continent as a whole. So I'm really excited to talk about Nkrumah today, because I personally, as a published author, but also just working on my dissertation, I have a lot of respect for people who can take complex topics and make them very simple and simplistic for folks to understand, because we're all coming from different levels, right? That's one of the beautiful things about political education, is whether you have 17,000 books that you have read under your belt, or whether you're just now getting into reading and you understand that reading is the developed skill and discipline, just like every other skill you have. Whatever your background is, that's the beauty of political education, is as long as you're willing to grow, then you can always learn more information. And there's some humility that comes with that, but that's a beautiful thing. My apologies. We start off by, I hit the mute button when the dog jumped on the bed. Sorry. We start off by talking about how our enemies have made it very clear that we are not the priority, but our money is, okay? So they continue to throw holidays in our face. It is very important that we understand that we need to spend as much money all the time, year around, as much as possible. Why? Because we need to, quote unquote, build the economy, right? Those are the things you're hearing. And then on top of that, you also need to understand that it's your responsibility to build the economy, and understand that you are always going to be imperfect. I say that on purpose, because if you did not have issues, then why would you need to buy skincare cream? If you did not have issues, why would you need to buy products that are continuously illustrating that you have problems with you? There's why do your teeth need to be white? Why do you need to make sure that your hair is not, quote unquote, nappy? Why do you need to make sure that your clothes are as tight as possible or as loose as possible? Because there's a problem with you being the weight that you are. Maybe there's an issue with your teeth being crooked. If you're missing teeth, that's a problem, because no one can smile with missing teeth. So we have all these different messages 24/7, you all, that are reminding us that we are imperfect, and we are ugly, and we are not capable of having love, and all of these things that are constantly being portrayed. I've told you all the example before about how now, if you are expecting a child, regardless of how you identify, if you choose to give that child human milk, then when you walk into that aisle of the store where they tend to have pack and plays, and when they tend to have burpees and things like that, so you can boast the child up and hold them in a certain angle, so you can essentially give them human milk. And if you choose to chest feed, then you can still do that. But you see all these products on those specific shelves about how you need to take this type of vitamin, or you need to drink this type of liquid so you can produce more milk, so you can do more for your baby, so you can give your baby more. And I always laugh at that aisle because it's a joke. First of all, you and your body and the baby have already communicated how much milk that child is going to need. You don't need to take some pseudo medicine to make you, quote unquote, give better milk. Your body knows how it needs to adjust, because guess what? That baby has been in your body for 9 months. And the baby has already communicated to your mammary glands what it needs from you. So it really disturbs me on a very high level. I'm very agitated, as you can tell, that you would have the nerve to tell me that there is something wrong with me when I've been carrying this child for 9 months. Now, even though I don't have children yet, that's what I've been told by my friends who are mothers or who are parents. And it's very disturbing to me, because for folks that have not yet given human milk to their children, that's intimidating to them. And that's exactly what imperialism wants. That's exactly what capitalism wants. You're not enough. You're not even enough for your child. How could you get your land back and be a socialist continent? These are the messages, my people. And we really, 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 really need to unpack it, because the sooner we start being more savvy to the game and calling game and recognizing game, then we can be more hip to understand, okay, that's BS. I just need to move forward and not even worry about that. Sure, I might have some lactation issues, but I also understand that my comrade Shukura said that I am enough for my child. And I need to go into it with that mindset. I don't need to assume that there's something wrong with me, unlike capitalist media is constantly portraying for us. We think about theories specifically. So for those of us that are really into learning theories and we're interested in applying these theories to see if the hypothesis would end up being something similar or different, in communication, we have two theories that we use in our everyday work. And I personally have used them when I'm teaching, but also in my dissertation: agenda setting theory and cultivation theory. Both of those theories are supporting what I just laid out for you, that basically media uses images and ideas to help frame how we need to think about things. And if you don't agree with me, and if you don't think that's true, then I challenge you to think about, between October of 2021 and February of 2022, how many times did you think about Ukraine? Between October of 2021 and February of 2022, how many times did you think about Ukraine? Because obviously that was before Ukraine became this big, big, big media message that needed to be shoved down your esophagus every 12 seconds that you turned on any type of media whatsoever. So the point I'm making to you is, before it was shoved down your throat, you may have not had a reason to think about it. Now, sure, there are some people that are enhancing their political education and they're reading about Ukraine, so they already understood all the hype and all the nonsense that was associated with it. But a lot of us have not yet come to that point, which is why we think Ukraine is a victim now, because that's how the media is portraying the message. That's how media is framing the message. They are specifically tailoring something that they want you to take away, and they're not expecting you to be smart enough to understand that they're only going to give you the story they want you to have. That's why it's up to us to do our own research, because if we rely on them, they're going to constantly lie to us, and then we're going to walk around and not know what we're talking about. And that's embarrassing beyond measure, because the only thing worse than not knowing what you're talking about is sharing that same false information with other people so that they can get on your bandwagon of arrogance and nonsense and ignorance. It's not okay. That's part of the problem now, is we don't have enough truth existing in the world. So we have to continue to think about that. We have to remember that cultivation theory and agenda setting theory are literally theories that have been around for decades, because people have been studying how media has framed people's thoughts. I encourage you all to think about that. If you have other examples, I challenge you to share them in the chat, but I think you understand the point I'm making is, we don't really think about things because we're so reliant on media, which is why we need to start being more independent and understanding that our thinking does not belong to us, but we can change that. We can change that. we can also use that same principle, knowing that that is exactly how they choose to attack us, is through ideological warfare. So we can use that same principle to help push the line of why organizing and joining organizations is really the best way to combat the idea that we are imperfect, and to combat the idea that there's something wrong with us and that we need to do more to pay more money in this economy, when we don't even understand how, if we had access to our land, that would really address a lot of the problems. See, that's what this system is trained to do, is to teach you that as long as you vote for the right person, and as long as you vote for a person that tells you that they care about you, as long as you vote for a person that looks like you, as long as you vote for a person that pledged the same sorority as you know where I'm.
I'm not sure where Shakur, what happened. Maybe Shakur lost internet.
Oh,
Are you
sorry
there?
about that.
Okay.
I don't know why I keep muting. I apologize, you all. I apologize. I'm going to try to rewind what I said. My point is that we need to understand, thank you, Daddy. We need to understand how voting for someone that looks like you is not the solution, because Africans continue to be annihilated when people are as dark as you in office, as well as when they are as light as you in office. That is not the solution. And this system will tell you that that's the solution, because they're still framing what they want you to think about. You need to understand that. And if you don't agree with me, then just think about how many Africans, how many indigenous people have still been murdered when we have people of color in office, whether it's local, national, or federal politics. You got to think about that, you all. But that's what they want you to do. They want you to keep voting because they're trying to frame how you think about things. So you got to continue to think about how, if the problem is still getting worse, then we must have a different foundation that we need to look at, because this same scenario is not yielding new results. It is literally the same thing, which is insanity, because the definition of insanity is for you to do the same thing and expect a different outcome. Okay. So we got to think about that a little bit more. And the last thing I'll say about that is, that means that we understand that when we get our land back as Africans, we need to vote in favor and support Palestinians so that they can get their land back too. Because if Palestinians get their land back before us, my dad has said this before, if Palestinians get their land back before us, that's something that we benefit for, because that's one less group that can be terrorized, and that's one less group that has to be under attack. That's one more group that has access to their power, because land equals power. So we support the Palestinians in getting their land back, and they support us in getting our land back. Again, if you did not watch the ALD broadcast, the African Liberation broadcast, you missed out, because we had a panel where we had a comrade from the Young Palestinians organization talking about the importance of Pan-Africanism and why the Palestinians support our African movement. And obviously, if they accepted our invitation, then they understand that we support their movement as well. So we got to continue to think about that, which is why we support indigenous people getting their land back too. It is stronger with more numbers. And if there are more of us resisting these systems of oppression, these oppressors are not going to be able to control us, you all. They are not going to be able to tell us what to do. There's going to be too many of us. There's going to be too many of us. I hate to say this reference, but if you watch The Walking Dead, you understand these people got to be organized when they're killing them zombies. Because them zombies, there's more of them than there are people alive at this point, especially if you've been watching all 12 years of this show. So you understand that organization decides everything. The last thing I'll say before I ask for the next slide is that we need to continue to understand that their whole concept, the oppressor's whole concept, is to divide and conquer. You must understand that. So this is the same system that sent letters that were based on falseness and mistruths to the Black Panther Party, and posed those letters saying that they were from members of the Black Panther Party, so that when these leaders read these letters and said, I can't believe Huey said that, I can't believe this person said that, I cannot believe Eldridge Cleaver said that, that was all lies based on the FBI, because they had access to lie and do that things. We saw that them do it with other organizations. My point is, that's their point, is that they need to separate us. If we are united, they can do nothing to stop us. So they must separate us. They must cause us to be angry at one another. We have to not be able to get along. We have to air our dirty laundry on social, because we don't know how to facilitate navigating through our differences for what? The revolution, which should always be more important than our silly differences that we have with one another. We got to understand what the priority is. What is the priority? Being free. It doesn't matter if somebody identifies as LGBTQ. It doesn't matter if somebody is a strong woman that you're intimidated by. You need to check yourself and get your bridges together, because we don't have time for that. We need as many strong people as possible. I personally don't want to identify with somebody who's weak, because that means the first chance they feel under pressure, they're not going to be able to support me when I need them. And I'm willing to support them, so it should be vice versa. As I said, we need as many hands on deck as possible. All right, I am ready for the next slide, please. All right, so just moving on. I know I lost a little bit of time by muting, and I apologize for that. But just moving on, I just want to remind you all that this is why our struggle is based on Pan-Africanism, because we understand that regardless of wherever you were born, that does not erase your base identity. If you identify as African, then you are African. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner we'll be able to deal with the nonsense of them taking over our continent. Marcus Garvey said, a people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. So if Marcus Garvey understood that we need to understand who our knowledge is, what our past history is, and their history and ancestry, we also need to know our origin and our culture. If we don't know that, we have no foundation. We have no foundation to know who we are. And that's a problem, because the system is already trying to tell you who you are. So it's up to you to understand that not only can you not rely on that, but you need to connect the dots and base it back in Africa. If in doubt, always start with Africa. That's where the problem started from. The moment they started coming in there telling us how we needed to navigate our stuff, the moment they had the Berlin Conference and then decided to bring ships over those oceans to our continent, the moment they shackled us and chained us up, the moment they lined us up and put us on the slave ship, the moment some of us jumped overboard because we did not want to be under their control, the moment they dropped us off in Canada, dropped us off in Germany, dropped us off in Sacramento, dropped us off in Miami, the moment they dropped us off in Cuba and dropped us off in Costa Rica and Venezuela, it was at that moment that we lost everything, because we no longer had control over our land, which means we could not identify how society would perceive us. And this is precisely why Africa is not respected. So therefore, why would Africans be respected? Because if the continent is not being respected, then anyone who descends from said continent is also going to be disrespected. This is literally the artery, you all. This is the point of reference. This is how the blood flows through the body. Once we understand that Africa needs to be free, all the other problems will eradicate themselves over time. Now, we know in a socialist continent and a socialist society, there are still problems, but I guarantee you it's not going to be as many problems once we get rid of homophobia. I guarantee you it's not going to be as many problems once we get rid of patriarchy. I guarantee you there is not going to be as many problems once we get rid of Islamophobia and transphobia, xenophobia. And once we help people understand, no one can be oppressed in a socialist society. If that is in fact the case, you cannot be capitalist and still support socialism. You cannot be patriarchal and still support socialism, because that means that if you are in fact rooting one of those systems of oppression, then that means that you understand that certain people need to be oppressed, but the masses of us don't need to be oppressed. And that is the most absurd thing that I've ever heard in my 35 years of life. So you must understand, if all of us deserve to have socialism and be free because we own our land and we decide how the resources are used in our land, then that means that none of us need to be oppressed and under attack. The sooner we realize that and center that in Africa, like our comrade Nkrumah tried to teach us so long ago, the better off we'll be. If you heard me before, you heard me say, he didn't want just Ghana to be independent. He wanted Ghana to affect the rest of the continent, because he wanted the continent to be interdependent on one another. He wanted us to have one economic system in the continent. He wanted us to have one system for military use. He wanted us to have one education system. That was his dying wish. And we need to continue to live that out, because we're not 53 different countries. We are one unified socialist Africa. Join an organization working for justice, and thank you for your patience with the technical difficulties.
Ashe, thank you for that grounding. And that leads us right into getting into some really specifics of Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, which is the result of everything that Shakura just got through talking about. So the actual book, the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, was written and produced in 1968. And the handbook, we would suggest, was Kwame Nkrumah's response to the political currents at the time. And you have to put it in the context of the early history of independence movements in Africa. And we start there because some people, like if you've never been to Africa, for example, or you live somewhere else in the world, you might think in your mind, because of how we've been so trained in such a backward way, well, that's great, but that doesn't really have anything to do with me. But we would argue that if you study history, the independence movements in Africa fueled the civil rights movements, like here in the US, and every movement African people have had all over the earth. And that's an easy connection to make. The only people that don't understand the statement I just made are people who have not studied it, period, dot. So everything with us starts and ends with Africa. Whether we know it or not is irrelevant. That's still universally true. So we start with the African independence movements. And when Ghana got its independence in 1957, you have to realize this was only 12 years after the creation of the United Nations. So at that time, people around the world still felt that the United Nations would be an effective tool to create balance and governance for the majority of people on earth. People believed that at that time. Kwame Nkrumah was one of those people who would have probably believed that. But after the experiences that he unfortunately had to live through, he was able to learn that that was not the case. The crisis in the Congo, where the United Nations was not only completely ineffective in addressing the capitalist efforts of Belgium, the United States, et cetera, to sabotage the Congolese people gaining their self-determination from Belgian colonialism and assassinating the leaders of the Congo, Lumumba and Pilo Okoto, and totally destabilizing the Congo to ensure that they continue to control the vast mineral resources in the now Kinshasa region of the Congo, the richest mineral resource region on the entire planet. And Nkrumah learned through the diabolical efforts of the United Nations during that crisis that the United Nations was, like everything else, a tool controlled by imperialism. Now, today we understand that about half of the budget for the United Nations comes from the United States of America. So of course they're going to control the objectives. So even that's why if you look at the history of the United Nations, no vote that they've ever engaged in, even if they voted, like they voted that Zionism, the Zionist oppression of the Palestinian people is racism. And that was in the most recent years overturned. Even though the majority of countries in the world, there were like almost 200 countries that participated in the United Nations. The majority of countries voted in favor of that resolution. It was overturned. So how could this happen unless the forces who support Zionism are in control of the United Nations? But again, this was not something that was well known in 1960 as it is today. So Nkrumah was able to come to that realization. And after the crisis in the Congo, there were, of course, a number of other crises of neocolonialism in Africa, where the colonists had put together. We talked about neocolonialism a couple of weeks ago. We gave, a full program to that topic. So we're not going to define it again. Go look at the video, read Nkrumah's book, Neocolonialism. There's a lot of material out here on it. But the point here today is that Nkrumah was able to realize from the crisis in the Congo, from the Central Intelligence Agency-led overthrow of his own government in Ghana in 1966, a mere 5 years after the crisis in the Congo, and other subsequent actions in Africa, the nature of neocolonialism and how, as a system, an institutionalized system, it would be impossible for Africans to gain real independence in Africa and control of Africa by relying on the structures that were set up to facilitate voting, like the United Nations, or even at that time, the Organization of African Unity, which is now the African Union, which Nkrumah was the key element in founding in 1963. He realized by the overthrow of his government a mere 3 years after that, that the Organization of African Unity, today the African Union, was also, like the United Nations, a tool controlled by imperialism through neocolonialism, its chief mechanism to control Africa and ensure that everything in Africa was carried out in the interest of our enemies. And so Nkrumah wrote this handbook as a result of all that, to recognize that the true change that we need to be free as African people would have to come from an organization effort focused around revolutionary Pan-Africanism, and that instead of the model that he helped create through the Organization of African Unity, now the African Union, where the government's united, understanding that all of the governments are corrupt and controlled by imperialism, that the true forces of liberation would have to come not from the top down through the governments, but from the ground up through the masses of people and through mass movements for change. And so that was the specific focus of the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, was to say the strategy has to be to unite African people on the ground, and that we cannot have a negotiated settlement to achieve Pan-Africanism. In other words, we cannot negotiate with the capitalists to have Pan-Africanism. It can only be achieved through revolution. It can only be achieved through the mass organization of African people into one worldwide unified force that fights relentlessly by any means necessary to seize power from the international capitalist and imperialist network, and to take that power and use it to create one unified socialist Africa and to meet the needs of African people all over the world, while, as Shakur mentioned, supporting other genuine liberation movements who are fighting for the same thing that we are, the dignity and self-determination for our collective peoples around the planet. So that was the foundation under which he wrote the handbook. And in the handbook, Nkrumah was very specific in making that point, that the true solution to our problems would be carried out from the ground up, not from the top down. So if you look at page 56 to 60 in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, he talks about what will be needed from a strategic standpoint in order for us to achieve Pan-Africanism. And he talked about the need to create a committee. We need to create a committee for political coordination, an All-African Committee for Political Coordination, or an AACPC, as he calls it in the book. And the AACPC would be the collection or the collective unification of all of the revolutionary Pan-African entities on the ground throughout Africa who agree with the objective of Pan-Africanism as being one unified socialist Africa, that all of those entities would unite into one. And once that process was complete and all of those entities were unified, that unified body would be the All African People's Revolutionary Party, or AAPRP. Now, the important point about that is the reason why you will never hear us in the AAPRP say that the AAPRP is built. We always say we're building the AAPRP. So the current manifestation that you recognize as the AAPRP is not the AAPRP in concept that we see as the entity that represents our freedom as African people. We are in the initial stages of building that and laying the foundation for that work. Clearly that's true because we don't have an AACPC yet. And until we have an AACPC, there cannot be an AAPRP. This is the foundation that Nkrumah laid out for us. So I say this because a lot of people, especially people here in the United States, they will say, well, the AAPRP, you don't have Pan-Africanism, so Pan-Africanism is not possible. And as soon as someone opens their mouth and says something like that, and I've heard it a million times, that tells me that they have no concept, no clue of what it is that we are doing and the work that we're doing and the strategic approach we're taking to the work. Because the work that we're doing right now is to build that All-African Committee for Political Coordination, because as I said, that is the step that's needed to have an AAPRP. So the work that involves is us working with all of these other Pan-African formations that we mention all the time. The Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, South Africa, what they call South Africa, with the proper name is Azania, the Azanian People's Organization, the Kenyan Socialist League, for example, the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists, for example, the Convention People's Party, the Democratic Party of Guinea, the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the Pan-African Union of Sierra Leone, the Amilcar Cabral Ideological School, and so on and so on and so forth. These are examples of the organizations that we would argue are the foundation for creating the All-African Committee for Political Coordination. So we work in unity with all of those political formations who are on the ground in Africa. And as Shakur said, if you want evidence of that, just watch the African Liberation Day webcast on YouTube, and you will see the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau participating. You will see the Democratic Party of Guinea participating. You will see the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania participating, the Azanian People's Organization participating, and you will see them saying the exact same things that we say, because we are one. We have one objective. So that is our work. That is our AACPC work. And the reason why we always say, watch the programs, you all, is because you all will sit there, and if you don't do it, you know somebody that does. You will sit there and will say, well, we ain't gonna never get united. And there's examples right in front of you with the click of a button about how we already are united in all kind of geographies and languages and everything else. We're already united. So the only people that don't understand that are people that are just extremely lazy and intellectually lazy, at least, and not willing to engage in 5 seconds. I mean, there's no excuse with the internet to be that ignorant in 2022 and beyond. And if you are ignorant, that's okay. We're not criticizing that, because everybody's ignorant of something. But don't stand. We did a program, ways people unwittingly support police agencies against our movement. When you sit up there and say things like, or you hear people say it and you don't challenge them, our people will never get united. We can't have Pan-African. There's too many languages, too much geographical space between us. I don't know anything about, I just know my life here, the United Snakes, all that kind of utter nonsense. When you talk like that, or you hear people talk like that, and nobody challenges that, you are unwittingly supporting our enemies, because those are their talking points. They're the ones who are advancing the concept that we can never have unity, when in reality it's already happening. And all you have to do is click a button and you can see that and know, okay, well, we are doing that. That is happening. And I know that I have worked with all of those organizations that I mentioned to you, worked closely with them. We just had African Liberation Day. So like the Zimbabwe Movement for Pan-African Socialists, they had African Liberation Day. We collaborated with them to sponsor the African Liberation Day they coordinated and had in Zimbabwe. We collaborated with all of the organizations. The PAC and Azania, the Pan-Africanist Congress, and AZAPO, the Azanian People's Organizations, just formed a pact to basically unify those two organizations in Azania. That's clearly a part of the work that I'm talking to you about, and we have been involved in that effort. Myself, I'm involved with work with liberation movements in Swaziland right now, where we meet weekly with them and helping them with political education implementation. And they participated in the PAC-sponsored African Liberation Day. And as a result of that, now they have tighter relationship with those. I mean, if you're hearing what I'm saying, then the work that we're doing is clear. But if you're turning on ABC and CNN and MSNBC, BBC and CIA and all of that nonsense, well, then you're never going to understand the work that we're talking to you about right now. You're never going to have the vision that we're telling you about. If you're just an individual reading books, you're never going to have the knowledge and perspective that we're talking about. It's great for individuals to read books, but you will never understand what I'm talking to you about if that's the extent of your involvement. The only way you can ever understand this is by being engaged in organization, because the example Shakura gave is correct. When you're engaged in organization, then you come in contact with Palestinian organizations, people on the ground in Palestine and occupied Palestine, and you work with them so you know that they are doing work to educate their people about the African liberation struggle, just like they know we are doing work to educate our people about the Palestinian struggle. You know that. The only people who don't know that are people who are not engaged in organization because you're not connected to any of the environments I just spoke to. And all you're connected to is what MSNBC tells you. And they tell you, well, the Palestinians are terrorists and you should have nothing to do with them. In fact, everybody that's Muslim is terrorist, and everybody that's in the Middle East is terrorist, and every African's a criminal. And so you end up regurgitating that kind of nonsense. That's how we know you're not in organizations, is when you regurgitate any form of that kind of nonsense. We know you're not in an organization. You don't even have to tell us. We can tell you ain't in an organization. I do it all the time. People talk like that, and I tell them, yeah, you ain't in an organization. Well, what does that have to do with everything? Because would you go to a brain surgeon to get brain surgery? Well, what are your qualifications? Well, I just, saw a couple of YouTube videos and had a couple of conversations about brain surgery. And so I feel like I know as much about brain surgery as anybody. Then you would say, okay, well, that's great. Go ahead and open my head up and operate on my brain. Of course you wouldn't, unless you're a complete fool. So why do we see our struggle for liberation any different? If you're not engaged in the struggle, you don't understand it. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how much you think you know. You don't understand it if you're not engaged in the struggle. So this is the work that we're doing. And the last part of this is that we're revolutionaries, you all. We're not, we had a discussion at our local event yesterday, and we talked about the concept of revolutionary violence. And, people's concept of it, and I understand it, is because the way capitalism trains us, we don't have the right to see violence as a viable tool. And anytime we entertain the notion that violence could be a viable and legitimate tool, then we're just evil for doing that. But yet in a couple of weeks, here in this backward country, they're going to have their 4th of July, which is a celebration of their violence against the British to steal this land from the indigenous people. And you will set off fireworks. People don't even see the clear contradiction. You will set off fireworks celebrating these people stealing this land violently from the indigenous people, violently from the British, and then turn around and the day, July 5th, when we say we're revolution, oh, that's wrong. I mean, it's wrong in that thinking because you're thinking like the slave they want you to think about. But revolutionary violence means that we have a right to organize and use violence as a tool for our liberation. I'm not just talking about self-defense. That's what they want you to think. Well, I can defend myself, but anything beyond that is wrong. They're using violence right now. Capitalism is. This capitalist country and the capitalist world is using violence right now as I'm speaking against people that look like us with your tax dollars. So I'm sorry, miss us with that nonsense. Violence is wrong. And every institution in this society is built to promote that message. The churches say it all the time. Violence is wrong. And there is no entity in the world where there's been more violence than in churches, in the history of churches. No entity. But yet every Sunday, well, violence is wrong. That is confusion. We're not getting sucked into that nonsense. We have every right, as Malcolm X said, to achieve our freedom by any means necessary. So the other aspect of the handbook is Nkrumah talked about once we have the All African People's Revolutionary Party, which cannot happen until we have the All African Committee for Political Coordination. And we've already explained all that. So if you're paying attention, you should be right here with me. Then the next part of the plan is to create the All African People's Revolutionary Army, the AAPRA. And that army would be the armed force that would carry out the revolutionary war against these backward devils that maintain this capitalist imperialist network. That's right, you all. Our plan is to go to war with them. But the only way that's going to happen is once we are organized. Because I did studies a few years ago. I looked at the forces of military throughout the world and did a study myself on trying to figure out the approximate number of Africans who participated in all of the imperialist armies around the world. Like, in other words, how many Africans are in the US military? How many are in the Canadian military? How many are in the British military, the French, the German? How many are in these militaries? And what I was able to ascertain that there are approximately 4 to 5 millions of us worldwide, including all the militaries in Africa, everywhere, Central, South America, the Caribbean, 4 or 5 million, conservative estimate of Africans who are in these militaries that are using them to work against our interests. So the concept of the All African People's Revolutionary Army that Nkrumah lays out in the handbook is that we would organize our people to not serve in armies for our enemies, but to serve in the AAPRA, under the AAPRP, to liberate Africa. This is millions of people we're talking about. We're not talking about some adventure movie, some Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where 4 or 5 people carry out a revolution. That's why people don't understand revolution, because the only concept is what they see on TV. We're talking about millions of people. We're talking about organizing this, which would mean consciousness raising. So people in the Congolese military would say, yeah, I shouldn't be in this. I should be in the AAPRA. I should be supporting the AAPRP and the ACPC. That's what Nkrumah's talking about, you all, in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. And so, again, so many people misunderstand this work. And, be honest, you ain't heard it explained the way I'm explaining it right now. Even if you read the handbook by yourself, you didn't understand it the way I just explained it, because you cannot unless you are involved in organization. It's just that plain and simple. So in understanding the handbook, a clear perspective, as Shakur said, is that you cannot understand the handbook unless you have a clear anti-imperialist, anti-xenophobia, anti-patriarchal, unless you understand that these things are wrong and that this system is about ensuring that you have an anti-communist perspective, that you are for imperialism, that you are for xenophobia, that you are for patriarchy, that you are for homophobia, all of these things, that this system wants you to maintain those backward ideologies. And so that's why we say you cannot be a true African nationalist and patriot for Africa and be homophobic and be pro-patriarch and be pro-capitalist. The only people that don't understand what our struggle is about. These false prophets who claim to be for African people and then they're pro-patriarchy, pro-capitalist, they're just trying to make some money, you all. And a lot of the people you're thinking about, I've told them that to their face. You're trying to make some money, and they get mad, but back up. Don't come within swinging distance, because you're a traitor to our people as far as I'm concerned. This is what Nkrumah was talking about. And so we understand that clearly. And it's essential to also understand that the concept of revolutionary consciousness and organizing work is the important element of the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. So the foundation of the handbook is that you're involved in this organizing work, as we are. Or if you're not involved, if you're not African, for example, you're involved in some organizing work that can connect to this work in an alliance format, in an accomplice format, or whatever the case may be. And so if you're not doing that, you can't understand it as an individual. If you're African and you're not in an organization, then you cannot understand this work that we're doing. That's why you're confused about what the APRP does. Well, what do they do? Well, I'm sick of reading it. When they talk about Kwame Ture's legacy, well, he came to the US once a year and gave speeches, and they write about that like the Pennell Joseph book, Stokely A Life. That's what he says in that book. And he's not the only one. That's what they all say. But these are people that are not involved in Pan-African organizing work. They don't understand anything about what I just explained about the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. They see Kwame Ture as an individual because that's who they are. They're academians, they're individuals. They're not in organizations working for our liberation. They're individual academians. They're petty bourgeoisie individual academians. So to them, they just see Kwame Ture coming and giving speeches. They don't understand that if you recognize organizing work, it's not about him giving a speech as a celebrity. It's about us collecting names for the people who walked in the room to listen to him and following up with them and getting them to join work study and getting them to become cadre in the emerging AAPRP so they can do this work that I'm talking to you all about. That's what Kwame Ture was doing. And how do I know that? Because that is the reason why I'm here today. I first heard him speak at Fresno State University in 1980. I didn't know anything about this. The flyer had a picture of Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré on it. And I was like, why does he have those people on here? I don't know anything about Africa. I ain't no African. I just want to hear Stokely Carmichael call white people honkies. That was my analysis in 1980 when I first heard him speak at 18 years old. And when the first speaker to get up there was a Palestinian, I was pissed. I'm like, what are these people? The Arabs have nothing to do with our struggle. That's how confused I was. And I'm saying that because the AAPRP process, which I eventually joined, the work study process, helped me understand how confused I was about all of those concepts. And now I've come from seeing Kwame Nkrumah and Sekou Touré on a flyer as aliens to be an adherent to their Nkrumah's Touré's Pan-Africanist ideology. I've come to see the Palestinian struggle as essential to bringing justice in the world and everything else. That is because I committed my life to the organizing process. If I had not done that, I probably would still be sitting here just as confused as a lot of you and a lot of people you know when we bring up these concepts. So that's why organization is so essential. And of course, we have many other concepts that key into that. You know, you can't understand it as an individual. We got to keep stressing that because a lot of us are so imbued with bourgeoisie ideology, which the primary tenet of bourgeoisie ideology is the individualism. So we only see the world through an individualist perspective, and we think that we know everything we need to know as individuals. But as the Honorable Marcus Garvey taught us, if we pay attention, we only live 70, 80 years. The world is millions of years old. And as he said, if you look at it like that, how the hell can you know everything you need to know in 70 or 80 years? But if you connect with an organization, now you've got dozens, hundreds, thousands of people who live 70, 80 years. Now you can effectively make a proper chase towards the necessary information collectively to solve the problems of the planet Earth. And of course, we use other elements to support Nkrumah's analysis in the handbook. Nkrumah's class struggle in Africa, for example. And of course, the many writings of Sekou Touré, Africa on the Move, what I would argue have influenced me more than anything else, Sekou Touré's writings. And so here we have a picture of, this is like a 25-year-old picture. It's exactly 25 years old, but this is when we first began to move from the concepts of the handbook being theoretical to being actually on the ground on a widespread basis. This picture is one of the first proof manifestations of that. So this picture was taken in Guinea-Conakry in 1997. And if you see on the wall, it's the headquarters of the Democratic Party of Guinea, one of our AACPC organizations in Africa, the party of Sekou Touré. You see on the far left on the wall, a picture of Ahmed Sekou Touré, of course. And the picture, the people in the picture, I don't know all of them, but the brother on the left, our dear departed brother Olu Gordon, was a Central Committee member of the AAPRP and a Central Committee member of the Pan-African Union of Sierra Leone. I had the opportunity to work with Brother Olu many times. Obviously, in the middle, standing above the African leaning down, is Kwame Ture, who was a Central Committee member of the Democratic Party of Guinea and the All-African People's Revolutionary Party, who lived in Guinea the last 30 years of his life after he left this backward country to organize in Africa because he understood that Pan-Africanism is the highest expression of Black power, which he, of course, helped popularize here in this backward dungeon of a country. To Kwame's left, with the hat, is our brother, Imani Imoja, now Imoja, who today is if you watched again our African Liberation Day broadcast, you saw him 2 weeks ago. He is a Central Committee member for the African Party for the Independence of Guinea-Bissau, the party of Amilcar Cabral, one of the founders of the PAIGC and the AAPRP. And Brother Imani is also a Central Committee member for the AAPRP. And then next to him on the left, if you watched our broadcast, Brother Ni Ardeoto, who was one of the longtime members of the Convention People's Party, the party founded by Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, and one of the original organizers of the All African People's Revolutionary Party chapter in Ghana. And Ni Arde received our Legacy Award and spoke live on the event 2 weeks ago. So I'm just saying that because do your research and stop spreading this nonsense. You're hurting our struggle. Well, we don't really have any. What they're talking about is a pipe dream. No, what we're talking about is the smoke blowing between your ears because you refuse to do the research to know what the hell you're talking about. Because clearly this work is not a pipe dream. It's happening. It's happening right before your eyes. And the struggle continues, and our liberation movements will all be united into one. That is going to happen like the sun follows the moon. And once we simply do that, we will have the worldwide fighting force of millions of Africans united in mind and body to achieve one unified socialist Africa that Kwame Nkrumah wanted for us when he wrote the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, when he wrote Class Struggle in Africa, when he wrote Revolutionary Path. And this manifestation will be the All-African Committee for Political Coordination, that Nkrumah vision, which will produce the All-African People's Revolutionary Party in its developed form. Not the initial form that it's in today, but its developed form. Because whether you help us or not, it's going to happen. And once it's in its developed form, then we'll deal with the people who refuse to help us. We'll be effectively able to do that because we will have an All-African People's Revolutionary Party and an All-African People's Revolutionary Army. And we've talked about that. These things are going to happen, you all. The effort is being made to make them happen. Your choice is whether you can get involved and support them or whether you won't. As Frantz Fanon said, each generation has its mission. You will either fulfill it or betray it. That's the choice that you have. And once we have this in place, our freedom is inevitable. Thank you for joining us today for this session. We want to invite you to come back next week. We have the wrong date. Sorry about that. It's Juneteenth, June 19th, not June 12th. That's today. Apologies. But we're going to have an edition on Juneteenth where we talk about how we can do so much better than the police and the corporatization of Juneteenth. So you want to join us for that next Sunday. Go to our Forward Ever shop, support independent revolutionary organization. We don't get tax write-offs. We don't get grants. We don't get PPP loans. We wouldn't want it if they drop checks off at our doorstep because we want to be independent. And the only way we can do that is with your support. So buy something. If you bought something already, buy something to give to somebody else. Keep supporting us on a regular basis. You'll give to the March of Dimes and the Red Cross and all these capitalist organizations that ain't helping nobody in the world. You do that. Some of you have your checks deducted every month to do that. We'll do that for the African Revolution. Don't just buy one thing. Well, I did that. You know, we can't sustain ourselves like that. So help us out. Go to aprp-intl.org. Sign up to join the APRP. Go to betterworld.me. These videos are all housed there. You can go there and click on videos and you can see all of these and you can share them with people. Good communists, go there. We're asking you to submit articles on Juneteenth. And we ask you to do that and participate in our Telegram events. Please do that. I actually have an article on this week's edition talking about the similarities between Trump and Obama supporters. I know that's going to hurt some feelings, but the job of an organizer is to agitate. So when your feelings are hurt, you have to ask yourself, are they hurt just because I don't want to face the truth? Or are they hurt because he's wrong? I guarantee you they're not hurt because I'm wrong. So check it out, please. And watch our International African Liberation Day broadcast. There's the link right there on the screen. Get educated about the Pan-African work happening in the world today. How can you comment on it when you don't have any information, when we do everything we can to put the information right before you? So please take advantage of that and help us spread the word. We got all our programs on the bottom there. Please support them. They're all trying to spread this work. we're not going to get any support from imperialism. We don't want any support from imperialism, but we can't do this without your support. So please help us out there. And as Shakur said, join an organization, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence, my book. Please buy it. If you bought it already, same as our Forward Ever shop, buy some other copies and give them to your friends. You buy all kind of self-help books that ain't talking about nothing but individualistic capitalist values, and buy those and give those to your friends. So buy a book talking about revolutionary organizing and give that to your friends, because the work, whatever little meager royalties that I get, and I'm happy to publish that information for people who want it, I can use that meager resources to continue the organizing work that I do here in California and around the world. So we thank you. We ask you to be safe. We say forward ever, backwards never. Join some organization. If you don't understand why we say that after today's broadcast, I really honestly don't know how you will ever understand it. But I can tell you one thing: we will never tire of trying to figure out ways to get everybody to understand it, because our objective is to get everybody in organizations, not because we're egotistical, but because we know that until the masses of people on earth are organized, that is the only weapon we have that can effectively defeat our enemies. And we know exactly who our enemies are. It's the worldwide capitalist imperialist network. Every other problem we have is a manifestation of that. And the only way we can defeat that is when we were organized. So get organized. Please enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening. Forward ever, backwards never. One unified socialist Africa. Have a great Sunday evening.